were putting forward such prominent ideas. After that, besides that, I did run for the Washington State House earlier this year. So, and that got a national endorsement, which was pretty exciting, but learned there's my poster, which is really lovely. I didn't make it past the primary, but did decently well. And also learned a ton about local politics, organizing and campaigning and things like that. So I'm kind of now, wanting to talk about that in the context of the national election and how do you use those skills and what I learned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. And Paul?
Yeah, hi, folks. I joined DSA in 1982, before many people on this call may have been born, but that's a judgment. There's an assumption I may be wrong about. I'm a longtime community organizer. I work for ACORN, which was the largest militant organizing group around the country for low and moderate income neighborhood associations that took on many forces, the Democrats and Republicans among others, across the country at a neighborhood level. They were pretty big, and honestly, the Democrats caved on them in when Obama got elected for different issues. That my analogy always is that everyone saved the major banks during the recession, but ACORN made some mistakes and they killed them. So that's an aside. So anyway, I joined in the 80s. It was a fascinating time for me to be part of. It was the Reagan era. And then I was excited to see DSA emerge again in the Bernie era, I would say, and Olympia with a whole lot of new energy. So longtime community organizer, being involved in anti-poverty work at the state level, as both a state employee and as well as an organizer of nonprofits and an executive director of nonprofits. So that's my story. And so enough.
Thank you, Paul. And yeah, you're not wrong that you've been in DSA longer than some of us have been alive. So thank you. And
I just have to say, I chair proudly chair the social housing group of Olympia DSA, and very involved in housing organizing, among other things, at the state level. So.
Yes, and we're very grateful for that. Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being on here tonight. It's great to see everybody. And yeah, I guess for my background, I'm mostly a rank and file union guy. So I was a member of the Seafarers International Union for about 12 years. But I got involved with socialist politics, I'd say back in like 2000 with Socialist Action back in the Midwest where I'm from. And so I worked with them for a while in the anti-war stuff. And then I think like a lot of people who saw the anti-war movement really not have much effect, kind of suffering the defeats of that. I was pretty inactive for a long time. And so, I did some stuff in my union, but then I just kind of chugged along. And then in 2016, when Bernie made the run, it kind of was the first time it got me inspired to actually start to do stuff again. And then, of course, when it all went incredibly sideways and it seemed just extremely urgent to actually get involved, I started jumping with DSA. And I have to admit, it wasn't initially out of any particular great ideological precise agreement with DSA in particular. It was really just looking at practically where the momentum is and seeing that was and still is now in DSA. And so I have to apologize. My neighbor is mowing the lawn right outside my window. So if you can hear that, I apologize. I'll can come back to me later, or can you all hear me? Okay, sure. So anyway, in mid 2012, I decided to change careers. I went to law school and I got a job here in Olympia in the Attorney General's office. And so I think one of the main things that I've been involved with is our drive to unionize the Attorney General's office. And so we successfully did that. And so we organized about 1,000 folks into the union here. This is the largest project I've worked on. But anyway, so now I'm chair of our locals labor working group, where we try to share that kind of knowledge and help other folks with their organizing drives as well.
Awesome. So to get into sort of the entry point that I picked to get into started really discussing this was Bernie, which has been a touchstone for a lot of us who are speaking, and I'm sure a lot of people on the call. It inspired people across the country, people who were already socialists, people who became socialists, people who may still not be socialists, but you should be. But I think even more than that, it really drove the sense of hope and belief in the possibility of collective political action to make things better. That has been absent from this country for a while. And of course, then Bernie lost the primary and didn't get through. So the first question I'd like to ask is what Bernie's role is now, where you see his position, and maybe a slightly different question, where do you see the role of the movement that supported him? So to start us off, I'm gonna ask Paul to respond to this.
Great, thanks, Riley. Okay, here's my take. One thing I'm gonna own up to, because I felt like the excitement around Bernie's campaign was very powerful, and I remember seeing Bernie at the first DSA organizing convention in Berkeley in the 80s, which again makes me an old guy. But I actually personally supported Elizabeth Warren because I maybe mistakenly thought that she would be more electable with the same kind of progressive opinions, so or progressive policy. So I'll just own up to that. But here's the deal. Those of us who supported both Elizabeth and Bernie need to get organized because we need to be pushing the Democrats who I optimistically think will take power in the Senate and the White House. And so just laying that out as an assumption, an optimistic assumption, we need to be pushing the Democrats to be taking on the issues that we care about. And that is single payer health care. And you know what? Anything it improves on Obamacare is a fucking good thing. So I'll just say that. But I want something that really makes sense. And we say Medicare for all, that's a good thing. It might be a different thing, but single payer health care is what we need because we have a dumbass system. We need a system that protects all kinds of people, but we need it in a lot of other arenas: affordable housing, obviously civil rights, and racial and income inequities are horrific in our country, and there's a lot to work to do. Climate change. So we need to take on a lot. And you know what? We as left folks need to be organizing big time to push our national leaders on that and our state leaders. So that's my main consideration when I think about that. We need to be organizing. We need to be involved in our unions, and we need to be organizing unions where there are none. And so I think the exciting thing about what Bernie brought about is some energy around that, but we need to get serious. It's not about a person running for presidency. It's really about organizing folks in all kinds of levels for the issues that matter. So I'll leave it at that. That's my take, and we can't let up. And obviously, well, I know you have further questions, Riley, so I'll leave it at that. So.
Thank you, Paul. Josh, would you like to take a spin on Bernie's role and then the movement's role behind him?
Yeah, happily. Yes, again, sorry, I'm a little distracted. The lawnmower is like 5 feet away from me, but it's one of the things of the pandemic here that I think we all are used to dealing with by now, hopefully. But I guess as one of the people who kind of was not really active a whole lot until Bernie's 2016 run came around, I guess for me, I think Bernie's whole run sort of showed the kind of dichotomy. Like for me, I pretty much felt defeated in electoral politics and didn't feel like that was a real useful avenue of time. But then in 2016, I see Bernie come along and just energize and galvanize just a ton of people and bring a ton of folks into the movement. I mean, he normalized kind of use of the word socialism for the first time in just ages, right? Which is just huge. And so, even as somebody who's pretty skeptical of working within kind of mainstream electoral politics, I think it's just irrefutable the progress that the Bernie campaign was able to make. And so recognizing that, but also at the same time, I recognize that those campaigns failed too, right? I mean, I think, especially now in 2020, it's the other thing that's just starkly clear is that the Democrats are just totally hostile to us just even coming close to power, even close. And so I don't think that like approaching it in a way that actually assumes that we'll take power is useful. And so for me, it's just totally all about the movement building, right? Like to the extent that we can use that to build the movement and to continue the progress, I think it's useful. To the extent that we think that we're actually going to take power, I don't see that as a viable strategy to achieve. And so anyway, so that's kind of what my organizing personally has been based around, is trying to do the kind of sort of political education or the union stuff. And so I think that movement can transfer really well into DSA, right? I mean, DSA exists whether or not there's an election going on. It exists independent of any political parties, whether it's the Democrats or third parties. So I think it's sort of just a hub for carrying out that longer term base building and organizing that we need to do. And that, I mean, I think I agree with Paul that we, it's just critical that we do that stuff, but just in terms of strategy, I feel like the approach is different. And so anyway, just as a kind of a plug, I'd say that that's one of the things that I've enjoyed about DSA so much, is the fact that we can both be in the same organization and have those different views and both do whatever work that matters to us. But in terms of Bernie as a person, I guess I hope that he'll continue to lead and kind of take that role that he has. At the same time, I'm also personally, it just hurts me every time I see him out there shilling for Joe Biden. It's just deep down inside, it just gives me deep psychological pain. And so I hope that part comes to a close pretty quickly here, and we can all move forward together.
Yeah, and Mary Ellen, I'd like to get your take on this, particularly as somebody who ran as a candidate following Bernie, and
well, one,
in no small way, yeah.
Like the ability, and I know we're going to talk about age and stuff. I mean, I can tell you how exhausting like a little piddly local campaign was. I can't even. I mean, just the dedication of what it takes to run for president multiple times when you are older, and just how how exhausting that is. I appreciate that. I think a little bit more than I did 6 months ago. But what it really comes down for me, what I think Bernie Sanders gave to this country was a lot of moral clarity, the ability on a national stage to really name what we all see as wrong, that we know is wrong, but nobody would, I think during the Obama years, et cetera, wasn't really stated openly, at least not on a national platform. That doesn't mean people were not critiquing capitalism and saying, we really should have healthcare for all. People were, but it wasn't getting that broad platform that it was. And it was just, and I think he was so popular was because he was saying things that are very, and as well as Occupy, et cetera, but he was saying things that are very obvious to people that live in this country, but was kind of covered up and just wasn't brought to the forefront. So I think that's where his leadership comes up, not necessarily in charisma or anything that he in particular is doing, but that real moral clarity that people can organize behind, that is popular because it's right. I mean, because he's saying what reality is.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughts, and that's that was a nice opening. But now we move on to what we actually have to deal with right now, right? Which is we've got two viable presidential campaigns, and we'll talk about third parties in a moment. But the two candidates that are likely to win are Trump or Biden. I'm going to go ahead and say that they're at least in visible mental decline, right? That there's, we're not. We have sort of a morbid centrist liberal, and we have, whatever you want to call it, at minimum, incoherent and violent right-wing political position. So it's a difficult choice. And the question then is, how should we approach that, right? I think especially thinking about us in Washington, but how in general should a socialist movement approach this race? So I'll actually ask Paul again if you wanted to sort of share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, good question. So ironically, I actually worked for the King County Democrats because of DSA, I will say. So when I joined DSA after being an Acorn organizer, moved back to Seattle in 81 or 82, and part of the movement said, you know what, join the Democrats and radicalize them. And I did that. I organized 25 people to do door to door in the Reagan era. We turned Seattle from a moderate. We kicked out a lot of Republicans and put in some Democrats, and they weren't all perfect, but guess what? They were still better than what was there before. And organizing and political work is hard, and it's not. I'm taking this with my age of, it's not as revolutionary as we'd like, but God damn it, we need a revolution, like Bernie said. But also we have to accept whatever change we can make incrementally as well, and we have to push for more. And we have some radical problems in our country, which we all know. And Trump has just fucking showed us he showed us that in spades, right? We need to kick him out. So I feel like we really need to work hard to elect Biden and then push him and the Congress to the left on a whole lot of issues. And one thing I was spent a day with a friend of mine who was much as like me, an activist in his 20s and 30s, who's now in his 60s, like myself. And one of our beliefs is that Obama came in and didn't do enough quickly. He tried to do it linear, so he took on healthcare. Well, we got something that was better than it was, but it wasn't enough. So we actually need to push on a whole number of fronts: global warming, healthcare, racial and income inequity, which has a whole lot of issues connected to that. We need to be organizing big time to take that on. And so that's kind of my main message is what we need to be doing. But I think we need to do it through the Democratic Party because, and I know, Riley, this is actually coming up, but we need to do it through organizations that will push the Democratic Party, because the third party situation in our country has never worked out so well. And if anything, it's helped right-wingers get in when left-wing parties have been in existence. So that's my take. We need to get organizing, people.
And I'm going to hand it to Mary Ellen in just a second, but I would just ask sort of a follow-up, Paul. Do you see that kind of organizing work? Is there particular organizing work we could do leading up to this election? Well, or how do you think what we think we can do before November 3rd?
The election is a month from now, so we need to get Biden in there, because we know that, right? And I never bought the old-fashioned communist vision, which the communists, I organized in an era where there was still a communist party in the USA that would say, well, we have to make things worse to get better. I kind of don't buy that, because I can't handle more Trump. And no one is saying that anymore anyway, because we don't really actually have a communist party. but that was some of the perspective that I, as a young activist, saw. So we need to put Biden in there, and we need to push. And that's just clear cut to me. Obviously, Trump is the worst MF that we've had in years. He makes Bush W look good. What the hell? We got to get rid of that guy. And so that's my take. We need to get him in there, and we need to push him to the left. And which, by the way, for a moderate guy, he's way to the left that he would have been without Bernie and this last and others that were in this election. So that's my take.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. And I'm going to hand it to Mary Ellen. And one more thing before then is just a reminder to folks that if you have questions for the panelists, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll ask them during the Q&A. But Mary Ellen, your take on how we should be relating in this, this last month.
Yeah, and I agree. It's hard, even when the best option is not somebody that I'm ever going to get excited about. I mean, I'm not going to be, there's just like zero, it's flat. I have spent a lot of time trying the past several years to really be thinking through this on a larger historical scale. And I think we are seeing the end of a certain America. I think that whether that is just through attrition or if it's going to be more active, political, socially, we're seeing the end of a white supremacist capitalist country that has wreaked a lot of havoc and destruction throughout the world and in our own country. I don't mean to be like, oh, it's going to happen tomorrow, but I think that like it helps me a lot to think about that this moment that we're living through is kind of the death throes of that we're seeing the end of that, and it's going to the extreme of something as ugly as Trump because it is so weak, and it's never been weak before, so there wasn't a need to go to that extreme. And I think kind of about the failure of Reconstruction after the Civil War, when we had this opportunity to rebuild and really build a better country. And I think we're going into a phase like that, because I think absolutely we need to be there and we need to be ready to meet those times, which is really terrifying, because I am also like Paul. I think that I don't want a violent revolution. I think that way more people are harmed if you look at that as like a good thing than if things are actually able to work through a democratic process. I think that should be our goal. But that there's no way that world that has existed, for the past close to 300 years is going to go quietly or easily. Like it's going to be rough, and that we're living through that, and it's chaotic and uncertain. And that Biden is what people felt they needed. And they felt that they needed something that was familiar and looked, they could acknowledge and say, like, I kind of know what this is, and it's comforting. So that's my theory of why Biden was the ultimate winner, when I think there was other better candidates, obviously, for president. So I think we kind of just have to take that and look at where we are in a larger sense in history, and things do not look like how I would wish that they would look, but that we have to get through this, and we do have to be ready to meet the moment and be organized, because that's when you have seen really heroic movements and big changes. It's when people were ready there to take that and go with it. And I think you also have to look at how much society and culture is changing so rapidly, and politics have not caught up to that. But I mean, I can see incredible differences in how people talk about race and how people talk about LGBTQ issues, how people talk about the environment in the last 20 years of my life. And so that is incredibly dramatic. And we have to be ready to help politics catch up with that cultural shift.
Hey, Riley, can I say something ahead of Josh just real quick? Because I think we're playing to what I'd like to hear from him, but.
Sure, I did want to ask one quick follow-up to Mary Ellen, though, which was just, I was wondering if you could give a couple of examples, without going into the whole thing, of why you think we're at this moment of weakness. What are the signs that you see that lead you to conclude there's sort of this fragility in the current?
Yeah, I mean, and I am not a historian, but this is kind of my take and understanding of it, is I think that if you look at, you go back to Reagan, like how very single-handedly Reagan presenting this worldview of like, okay, this is law and order, and this is the way economics should be, the government is bad, etc. Like, he was incredibly popular, and no, he was not as unstable as Trump was, but he had this very hegemonic view of people didn't even question that's what it meant to be an American. This is what this is what life looked like. Life is going to work out for us. Everything is fine if we just go along with this. And I think that is the numbers of who are white Americans, that things are really working out for them, that aren't worried about, Christians, they're not worried about the environment, things are working out fine. Like, those numbers are so small compared to what it would have been, 40 years ago, 30 years ago. And I think that and even just the Black Lives Matter movement, and just saying, like, no longer trying to, people are out in the street, and you can just, I feel like I feel that on a very visceral level of watching that. Was that a good answer? I could keep talking, but.
We'll arrange a separate lecture for you to explain this whole thing later. So yeah, Paul, do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something, and I think this plays into Josh's interest. One of the things that struggles with me about Trump is that Trump touched, even though he's a gilded billionaire bullshit con man, sometimes he touched into something that working class, mostly, well, let's just say white Americans faced. And they got screwed over by the global economy. The Democrats, in my opinion, screwed up by not taking care of them, helping them get through that in a big, giant way with workforce development and training support, et cetera. And the Republicans were part of that too, because they just all cared about cutting taxes. And so that's our problem, is we need to engage, while we know demographics are changing, we still need to engage people that feel really broken global economy and the loss of manufacturing jobs and other things. It's very complicated, but that's what we need, and that's what we collectively screwed up on. And we need more unions. We need powerful unions, and that has shifted, and that's been a very unfortunate thing. That we can't blame the Democrats for it as much. I mean, it's the Republicans too, in a bigger way, but the Democrats should have been paying more attention. So that's the thing that I feel a great need for, because people are hurting, and that's sadly why they voted for the idiot Trump, the con man Trump. So anyway, that's my take. So Josh, you tell us about what that's like.
No, I appreciate that perspective from both of you. I guess, so to just sort of back up to the question, right? I mean, the question is kind of how we should relate to the election. And so I personally, I would reframe that, because I don't think that's necessarily the most useful device. You know, I mean, that's how the Democrats want to paint it, right? Either you're for Biden or you're for Trump, because then it sets up the answer like, well, of course, I guess I have to be for Biden then if those are my two options. I disagree. I kind of agree with Eleanor there in the chat. I don't think that's a great strategy. And so part of my view on this is that I think the more useful way to look at this is, how can we best be effective, right? I mean, how can I, as an individual, how can DSA as an organization, how can we be the most effective that we can be, using our unique kind of talents and position and strengths to move the ball down the field to win the things that we all want to win. And I think that when you look at it like that, it really, I mean, it makes it starkly clear that, for all the reasons Paul said, if you live in a swing state, I mean, I hope that, you know, at least vote for Joe Biden. I mean, I personally, I'm not going to go out there and make calls for him, but I mean, I think it's important that he win. I disagree with some of my comrades on the lengths that folks are, you know, maybe willing to go to help achieve that. I don't particularly appreciate the Democrats trying to shame me into supporting Joe Biden, which I get constant texts that tempt me to do that. You know, because I think if we're all really pulling together like they like to say that we are, then I can continue to pull for workers' rights and for healthcare and for these issues that matter to me without pulling for Joe Biden. And if Joe Biden really stands for those things, then, you know, he will pull in that direction too. And at the end of the day, Joe Biden is going to either win or lose on the merits of his campaign, right? I mean, what a few thousand socialists do is not going to make or break the Biden campaign. It's just not. And so I think what we can be really effective in, again, using our kind of unique niche in the kind of scheme of things right now, is to build that independent organization that needs to exist to keep the thing moving in between elections, to keep the pressure on that did not exist during the Obama years so much. And so personally, that's where I'm choosing to spend my efforts, right? To do this sort of non-electoral organizing, political education, in unions, and healthcare issue-based kind of organizing work. For me, that I can do that with a good conscience, and, you know, not being out there shilling for a candidate that I disagree with. So I can feel good about what I do, and I can know that that's actually working for the issues that matter to me, and not for any one individual person. So that's the way I try to approach that decision. And I hope as a group, as a broader DSA coalition, I hope we can do that too, because I think, frankly, and this falls into the next question more with third parties, but if we're not doing our own thing and we're just following on the Democrats, then we don't really have a unique identity that's going to withstand kind of any sort of pressure or attract people or actually grow. If we're channeling all our energy into something else, then that's not us. It's not building an independent kind of socialist movement that I personally think that is the critical thing that we need. So I guess that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. So that is one of our next questions. And talking about how DSA relates to other campaigns, right? Excuse me, as well. Josh, I think you mentioned this earlier, but just so folks know, DSA is not, we're not organized as a party. We don't have a ballot line. And DSA candidates run usually on the Democratic Party ballot line, but not always. And then there's a range of views within DSA. However, at our last convention, we did pass a resolution stating that we want to work towards an independent party for the working class, although time frame unclear on that. So I'd like to ask folks, what do you think the significance of currently existing third parties on this election? Maybe also we can talk about other races that are going on. But Josh, I know this is something that you're interested in, so.
Sure, I guess, just to start, this has been the one of the big topics on the left, right, for a lot of years. Like, do you go with the Democrats and try and push them to the left, or do you build an independent third party now, like the Socialist Party or the Communist Party? And so I think, this has been something that's kind of fractured the left for a really long time. And I personally think, practically speaking, the left is so far from power in this country right now that it's almost purely an academic debate, right? It's like, I don't see that socialists have really pushed the Democrats to the left. I don't see that the Socialist Party has really made an impactful kind of sting on any kind of national politics. Maybe some local races. It certainly happens. But I just don't see either of those two things being really either one of them to be overwhelmingly kind of effective. And so to me, it's just, there's no one clear answer to that. So whatever you want to do that works for you, just go ahead and do it. If you want to work in the Democrats and you think that's effective, right on. I personally don't. And so I don't do that work. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about bringing people in and doing work that is meaningful to you. And so I think that it's just super important that you do work that you feel is effective. And that can be inside or outside of the party. But just to kind of come back to the third parties themselves, I guess in this election, I guess we don't know what's going to happen, obviously, but you can look to the last election for some kind of indication. And I don't think there's any actual evidence that Jill Stein voters, threw the election for Trump, right? I don't think that's why Trump won. Trump won because a huge mass of people just didn't vote because the Democratic candidate was not sufficiently inspiring to get people out there to vote. And I fear that will be the thing that happens here again in 2020. And I certainly hope it won't. But so I guess kind of in light of that, I just think that the Bernie campaign has showed us that, number one, there's a huge audience for our ideas for things like Medicare for all and for tuition-free college and a Green New Deal. Was tens of thousands of people at rallies out there who were really excited about that kind of stuff. And so I think Bernie showed us that people are interested in that. And then the other thing is, I think that this election has shown us is that the Democratic Party, again, is just totally hostile to those actual values. And so, to me, I can't help but see that the second he was starting to pull ahead there in Nevada, that the centrist candidates and everybody consolidated around Joe Biden, just totally edged Bernie out. And so I think that's just totally indicative of the dynamic that we're dealing with, right? It just shows that problem just starkly revealed. And so at the end of the day, to me, it just comes down to building that strong independent socialist movement. And, whatever you think is going to be the best option to do that. I say right on, and good to you and welcome aboard.
So I wanted to hand it over to Mary Ellen, both if you want to respond to this third party question, and then also somebody who has some experience with with non-ballot races to speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, somebody has not brought up the option potentially, but there is a lot of movement in Washington state and nationally to do ranked choice voting, which actually could change potentially ranked choice voting. And if the Electoral College, we moved away from that, could really change the face of what third parties look like and what democracy looks like in this country. So I think, there are options there. It would definitely involve some pretty big changes before that would happen, because I agree they're not particularly viable right now. But I also think that there's also an important role of, one of the things that has been really problematic with the Republican Party is they are like bankrupt of any ideas whatsoever. Like there's nothing coming, really new ideas coming out of the party at all. And so I think that is something that the DSA and the left can always be putting into the Democratic Party. And I know that that's more of the collaborative versus the, confrontational model of what does the left do. But I think that is always an important piece. And also really important is people just need to be involved in democracy. And that means being involved at the local and the state and the county, at the county level, and being involved in knowing how it works, knowing who your representatives are, how are laws being made, kind of holding people accountable, our elected officials, even if it seems like they're doing it, you're like, okay, they're kind of doing an okay job, I haven't been bothered by anything they've done. Really being aware and involved. And I think that we talk, a lot about the socialist aspect, but I also think that the strengthening our democracy is so incredibly important. If we are going to be able to make this through as a country, through this struggle, and build something better, that's absolutely essential. And I think that whether that is because you really want to be involved in a third party and you want to build that, or because you really want to be part of the local democratic organization and you're all in, it's just incredibly important that the working class becomes more involved in democracy and not shut off or thinking that it isn't either worth their time, or that they will not make a difference.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that question of getting involved with democracy in a second when we talk about some of the potential November 4th scenarios. But first, I just want to give Paul, if you want to weigh in on this issue at all, I'll give you a chance to talk about that.
Yeah, of course, I'm 63 years old, so I've been involved in community organizing since my early 20s. Trying to, whatever credibility that gives me or not. But anyway, I'm sad to say that we have a two-party system, and in all my experience of third parties and interest in them and support for some of them, I've never seen it come of anything that helped. So I just feel like we have to radicalize the Democrats. And you know what? It's not going to be a perfect thing. Like it or not, we have a more moderate country than we'd like to believe here on the West Coast or in Olympia. And so we have to work to push the and my humble opinion is we have to push the Democrats, but we have to get all the different forces at play to doing that. And many of the organizations are doing that, and the environmental, the union, et cetera. But we need to push all those kind of organizations and movements to more dramatic, whether you call them left or more dramatic positions, because we have a lot of problems in our country. And then, sorry, that's my dog Vinny. He's speaking up. But Trump has made it worse. But I've never seen a third party situation help, sadly. And so I just think that this is the example of Bernie. Bernie finally got involved in the Democrats, and actually when he took off in a national figure was when he said, "Okay, I'm gonna be a Democratic candidate." We have to think about that. And so what we really want to do is push the party to the left. Which, think about Biden. Actually, Bernie and Elizabeth have pushed Biden to the left, and now his vice president candidate is one of the most progressive voting senators, along with Bernie. She's in the top 5. So we have to hope for that. And we don't have a parliamentary system at the national level, but we need to organize big time, because we have some problems. I mean, the most disappointing thing to me is the way the working class part of society has ended up, many people have supported Trump. And there's a big problem with that. And we could go into that, what that means and why that is. But that's something I think we really need to organize to overcome, because I think they vote against their own self-interest and we have to overcome that. And then obviously the racial and income injustice and inequities are fucking giant, and we have to keep pushing on that too. And so, but I'm a believer that I wish we could do it through a third party, but I have never seen a viable third party that matters. And so is Vinny, my dog, actually. That's why he's speaking out. So anyway, that's my opinion. And so I think organizing locally, and that's what I learned from DSA when I got involved, when DSA was formed in the 80s, is like, I'll just say we kicked out a lot of Republicans out of office in the legislature. And we did door-to-door organizing, and we did it big time. And we did it through working with groups like with Democratic Socialist leaders, members were part of NARAL and the environmental organizations and unions, and that's the way we did it then. Now this is a different time, but I think that's what we need to do. We need to get involved in our organizations and push them to the left. So that's my take.
Can I just jump in and say one
sure.
thing? So I guess so the first presidential election that I really paid attention to and had any participation in was the one in 2000, and I was a proud Ralph Nader supporter. I was out there tabling for Ralph, mostly because I saw that his analysis and his critique on stuff was largely correct, right? I mean, he was just blasted both parties as contributing to environmental catastrophe and capitalism out of control. And I think doing that, I mean, to the extent that we're talking about pushing Democrats to the left, I think you can still do that from outside, right? I think critiquing them, if that critique is actually well taken, if they actually care about those values and want to come around to that, which I think is debatable a lot of times, but if they do, I think those critiques from outside can still be effective, because that pushes voters that way, it pushes candidates that way. And so I guess I just wanted to have a friendly disagreement with Paul that we need to, or that the best place to do that is necessarily from within the institutions.
And my only question was it better getting George W. Bush in there or Albert Gore?
Right, and that's the really hard thing, because if you look at the numbers, I mean, you can sure make that, but you can also look at the numbers and see how many people just sat it out because they hated both parties. And I think it's, in my view, I think that's why we ended up with George Bush, is not because, a few 100,000 people supported Ralph Nader, but because millions of people sat out the election because both parties suck, and they all agree on that.
So that's the thing, the reality of a kind of a organizer's point of view. I mean, yeah.
Paul, we're not going to resolve this disagreement right here. No. I think that we have a good.
Let's go back to that, Riley.
And we are also, we've got time, but we want to keep us so we can get our final last couple questions, which is, and maybe we can kind of consolidate this into one, but talking about what we might need to do immediately after the election, right? So, I mean, we all know that it's a possibility that, hey, maybe it's boring. The polls show Biden wins, maybe he wins, and that's it. And we all just wake up and it's fine. And maybe Trump somehow wins straight out in the vote, and maybe Biden wins and Trump refuses to accept it. And I mean, any of us on this panel claiming to know what's going to happen, I would have serious doubts about. So I wanted to put out this question, right? With the uncertainty that we have, how should we be prepared to react on the 4th, and then beyond that, right? In January, whoever's elected, what kinds of work should we continue to do? So, and Mary Ellen, if you wanted to sort of open us up on this topic.
Yeah, and I think you can absolutely have a conversation about kind of preparing for the worst. I mean, I think that it is not. It seems very, very possible that Trump would either, rig the election and use, or through the Supreme Court, use kind of strong arm tactics, or would just flat out refuse to leave, and then we would have to be, then we would be faced with that reality of like, do we even have democratic elections anymore at the federal level? I think you can do that without being like, I'm not a sky is falling person necessarily, but I think being organized, and I think that the importance of organizing locally so that, you know, if things very much get bad and it is kind of ugly, if we have, you know, the border patrol suddenly becomes, you know, is here in force, staying in mass and not just kind of showing up and leaving quickly, on the kind of on the West Coast, you need to, so I'm trying to sound not too alarmist, and at the same time kind of discussing about what I think of or things that I worry about, that what could happen, is you want to be very organized. And we need to have, if there is going to be something like a general strike, or if there's going to be mass protests more than there already have been for that issue, you need to be doing it, you know, coordinating at a national level, at your local level. So you should know the people who you would want to be protests with, who are the people you'd want to communicate with, and kind of whose direction are you going to be following. So you're not like just going and having, you know, kind of mass hysteria where people are all freaking out and just spending their time on Twitter. You want to be, you know, have an idea of what kind of action you need to take and who you need to take it with. So yeah, and I think you can do those things that no matter what happens, to not be despairing, I think is also really important, and not decide that all is lost because Trump is fighting losing the election and not handing it off to Biden, and that we need to be ready and planning, but without despair, I think is super important. And I think that local organizing is just essential to all of that, because you really, really need to know who lives in your community and who you can stand with and who you can count on.
And Paul or Josh, would either of you like to speak to this November 4th question? Looks like you, Paul.
You say me? Okay, I thought so. Yeah, okay, if Biden wins, we need to kick ass and get organized and push him on all the different giant challenges we face as a country and a nation and a people. If Trump, we need to take to the streets regardless, actually, but especially if Trump like does any kind of bullshit stuff. And it was amazing what happened when Trump even won the Women's March, the Science March, etc. We can't let up on that. But if Biden wins, we really need to organize it. It has to be deep, and it needs to be, well, in either case, we need to be, it can't be just a march. It has to be ongoing and deeply connecting to the communities and interests of the country. So I am hopeful that Biden will win. And then what we have to do is push him to really take on the issues that matter in a deeper way than his more moderate sensibility does. And I think there's a possibility of doing that with the Democrats in Congress, especially in the House. So if Trump wins or fights the election, then we just have to take to the streets. So.
Yeah, and Josh, if you want to have the final word on this before we move into our Q&A.
Well, I guess I totally agree with everything Paul said. I heard a recent quote from Angela Davis that basically was saying that it's important that Biden win, not because he's the answer to our issues, but because he's at least amenable to pressure, whereas Trump's just totally oblivious to it, right? And so I totally appreciate her analysis and their history of work that she's done. But I mean, again, it really is just, whether either of them wins, we just need to keep fighting and trying to build power and just doing what we do. And so for me, I don't know, it's, again, however folks want to do that resonates with them. If it's inside a party or outside of it or independent, personally, I think independent, but, as long as folks are engaged in action and doing stuff, I think that's the key thing, right?
Yeah. So thank you all. We come to the end of the allotted time for the panel discussion, but I would, if any of you had anything in the back of your head that you wanted to shout out, But otherwise, actually, no, we do have some Q&A that we tracked. So let me see what questions we got. So we've got a couple, and I think maybe I'll just ask for one of you to answer each one of these. But the first one is, and this is back when we were discussing the Biden versus Trump, is how do you address people who cannot trust Biden or establishment Dems, especially considering the 9 women who have credibly accused Biden, of sexual assault? Those of us who don't believe that they can be pushed left enough to follow through on their promises because of how sold out they are. So I would maybe give that first bite to Paul, right? Because I feel like that's addressing your perspective, and I'd just be curious how you would respond on that.
Well, Biden's issues haven't been clear, unlike a lot of other Me Too movement sexual assault accounts. But obviously, he needs to be held accountable. I mean, here's the thing: if he wins, I'd like him to be held accountable for women's and gender issues in a big time way. Not held accountable, for making change. And I can't speak to what he may have been accused of. Obviously, he's got a powerful woman of color as a vice president, and I would look to her to really take on the mantle and push Joe on that one. And I can't speak to his issues. They haven't come out like so many other celebrity or political people. So I just can't speak to that. But anyway, it's unacceptable, obviously, and we've actually come to an amazing time recently of putting that reality out there, and so we just need to keep building on that. That's what I can say.
Yeah. So we've got a couple other questions that I'll get to in just a second. I do want to just notice, Salvatore mentioned having joined in the chat, and if you also would like to get into our raffle, first of all, you can join at the link that Kenny's going to drop into here, but also make sure to let us know in the chat, and we'll get you in the list in our drawing. But the next question we have up, and if any of you may not know the specifics about this, but what do you all think about the People's Party organizing over the next 4 years? I don't know if any of you know to speak to that.
Nope. The only kind of third parties I've been tracking recently are the Party for Socialism and Liberation. It's probably where I'll be casting my vote this year. That's the one thing I feel like in Washington, we have a freedom. It's not a swing state. Joe Biden is almost certainly going to get our 12 electoral votes, no matter anything that any of us on this call do, right? And so I guess, I don't know. I think, like I said before, I think the numbers just show the impacts of third parties are really just negligible. And so to me, the work and energy is better spent in other things, building campaigns that are more likely to last, and focus our energy more on that sort of stuff instead.
Yeah. And then our last question, and I'll hand this initially to Mary Ellen, but any of you can comment on this, is just with the disagreements as they exist, how do we find enough common ground to not disintegrate? How do we plan, strategize, and build a mass organization? So first of all, I'll just say thank you to the panelists for demonstrating exactly how to have a good comradely discussion. This bigger question, how do we hold together? Do you have any thoughts about that, Mary Ellen?
Yeah, I do. And there was also a question about the dirty break and I was going to say these questions and these issues are really, really at the forefront of people at the national DSA. Like they're being debated like very hotly all over the country. Like this is, us trying to hash this out, what is next. Like I said, I consider myself a very collaborative person. And so I think that the couple things that you need to do, you need to get to know people as human beings. When we're talking about like a community, you can actually know all the people just in our DSA. and you can give people the benefit of the doubt, even when there are disagreements. I think that there are some disagreements that you can't work around, and you just have to be like, well, we can't talk about this anymore because you're never going to have common ground. But you don't have to, you don't have to make every single disagreement a moral issue, or that you see that makes that person a bad person because they disagree with you. And so I think that accepting that people are going to disagree forever and ever, especially among leftist organizations, and that kind of tension is okay, that's going to be there and people are going to say different things, but that when it comes down to it, that is somebody that you're going to, that you're going to respect, and that you hopefully will be there if that person needs you. And that's how you build community. And that makes me sound like Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, but it really is like, that's the way that you learn to trust people, and you learn to work with them. And even if you're like, you cringe when somebody says something in particular, or, like if somebody says, that they supported a certain person or not another person, but you accept that and you kind of move on, and you don't make that conflict something that's going to blow it up.
Fantastic answer. I don't know if Paul or Josh, either of you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I'd just say that
go ahead.
I think that's one of the neat things about DSA in particular, that it's big enough and there's enough going on that a lot of our work can just kind of pull together, right? So, I mean, like our political education events can help inform our organizing, and then our organizing can help inform specific campaigns, whether they're on issues or local candidates or whatever. And so I think all that stuff really works together nicely. And so, like, for me, it's like, electoral politics, frankly, just really turns me off. And so I can stay out of that, but I can still do work that has meaning. And then when Mary Ellen runs, and that's different in kind than what I see as most of the other kind of electoral stuff out there, I'm ready to do a little bit to help out on that, right? And so I guess I just think we can all work together in the organization in a way that that does kind of have a cohesive kind of thrust to it, that I think not a lot of other organizations have really been able to pull that off to the degree that DSA has, in spite of our differences.
Yeah, I think that's, speaking as somebody who's been on the admin side of things within DSA, I think that's something that we all, this organization as a whole, can take a lot of pride in, is our ability to be democratic and to sort of actually live this stuff out. We have these disagreements, but then when it comes to it, when the rubber meets the road, we have each other's back. So with this, I want to give, before I hand it over to Sarah, I want to let folks just mention a couple things that are upcoming, that if folks want to get involved with. The first is, Josh mentioned a couple of times, our political education. And right now we're running our Socialist night school for the next month and a half or so. And that's, the next one is coming up this Saturday, tomorrow at 3. And I'm going to ask Kenny to just drop the link to olydsa.org/night school in the chat, if you could. And you can go and register. The next one is on what is democratic socialism, hosted by our education chair, Austin, which would be fantastic. Also, if you're interested in getting involved, we have our general meetings coming up. Next one's on the 17th at 4 p.m. You can find the registration for that on our website, olyDSA.org. But always happy to do one-on-ones too if people join. And we do meet people join, right? I mean, if we're going to plan stuff for November 4th and be ready to react to stuff, I mean, I think that Josh is right personally, that the Democrats are not going to be organizing people to get out in the streets, even if Trump tries to steal this. I don't think that they have that instinct, and so it might fall to us to do that. So if that's something you want to get involved with, please join, get in touch with us directly, and do that work. But if you want to do something honestly a bit more positive and proactive, one thing that we do have going on is we've endorsed Mary Ellen Everson, who's running in LD19 for that's State House. So that's Southwest Washington. It's outside of our organizing area, but Mariana is fantastic, a wonderful candidate running against a straight up Trump Republican. I mean, the Trumpiest Washington Republican you could have. And Mariana is a wonderful Bernie-style Democrat, she's a nurse standing up for Medicare for all, universal housing, rebuilding for her out in Aberdeen, right? Rebuilding the economy there on something ecologically sustainable. So we've been doing a lot of work, and if you want to get involved with that in the last month, they need all the help they can get to win, because it was gone up against an incumbent, but that incumbent only won by 200 votes 2 years ago. So it's very vulnerable and could really change the shape of the politics down there if she wins. So with all of that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to talk a little bit more about what our local has done in terms of setting our local, a lot of locals, but our policy platform for Thurston County and for Washington State.
Thank you, Riley. I recently had the misfortune of rediscovering how calm I can make myself talking to the police. So to deal with nerves, I'm pretending all of you are cops right now. I'm Sarah DeStasio, and through a number of twists of fate, I became the co-chair of the local. And I'm going to talk to you about a small but mighty document, our policy platform, which does three things. First, it states our near to midterm goals for our organizing work, including our electoral work and policy work. Two, concretely on the ground, it helps us plan, implement, and evaluate the success of what we're doing. So it forces us to think, is what we're doing really tilting power towards the multiracial working class and laying the groundwork for more demands and bigger victories later on? And third, it informs our endorsement process for candidates. It's something that we hold candidates and members of the local accountable for. And I want to acknowledge the hard work that members put into this document. So some of the folks who did that work are on this call tonight. So there's Isaac Wagnans, who chaired the platform committee, Mary Ellen Biggerstaff, Kenny Farver, Lizzie Karp, Corey Miller, and Luke Noble. So thank you all, and thank you to all the members who reviewed and commented. And so with gratitude for that work, I'm going to give you a bit of a dramatic reading. This is just the preamble to the platform, slightly modified and shortened for this stage. Socialism has seen an incredible revival in this country. Over the last several years, the necessity for an alternative to the bleak status quo of neoliberal capitalism has become clear, and the demands have grown ever stronger. The Occupy movement, the presidential campaigns of Bernie Sanders, Black Lives Matter, and protests against police brutality, widespread opposition to the bigotry and anti-worker agenda of the Trump administration, and increasing impatience with the Democratic Party, whose resistance has failed to meaningfully constrain Trump. This and so much else has helped create a new movement for economic and social justice. The Democratic Socialists of America, founded in the 80s and a small fringe group, sorry Paul, for decades, is now the largest socialist organization in the US and growing rapidly. DSA chapters across the country have won policy and organizing fights, and at the local, state, and national level, our members are voted into office. In this critical moment, it is vital that we as socialists openly proclaim our principles and goals to bring more people into the fight for socialism and to distinguish ourselves from liberal reformers and ideologically unaligned progressives. And as a footnote, up until 5 years ago, I think calling me even a moderate Democrat might be generous. So liberals and progressives, I see you out there, come on in. Democratic socialism is dedicated to the principle that true democracy includes the economy. Economics and politics are inseparable, and for true freedom and liberty to prevail, all people must have a meaningful say in shaping the society in which they live, and that includes their workplace. We envision a society and economy that does not exist to produce profit and power for an unaccountable few, but to fulfill human needs and enable the greatest possible flourishing for all of us. So the platform has 7 sections: labor, housing, environment, finance, education, criminal justice, and healthcare. I won't be going through each part of each topic, just highlights. And I'll also be linking fights in our region to each section where that's possible. So you should consider this a teaser. And if you want to know more about our platform, you should come to our general meeting on the 17th. Somebody put that in the chat. Also, many years ago, I had a friend who dropped acid somewhere in the Rockies. And this was a friend. This wasn't me. I'm going to run for political office someday. And her primary takeaway from that experience was, it's all one thing. So whatever the origins of that insight, you can apply that to our work. If you lose your job, you can lose your healthcare, you can lose your housing, all of it against a backdrop of colonization and white supremacy. So we can talk about these issues separately, but they are all interrelated and they share a common cause, and that's capitalism. So we'll start with labor. Oly DSA says that every worker has the right to a work-life balance. And that's why we stand in support of Providence St. Peter's technical unit workers, the people who do our x-rays, MRIs, CAT scans, echocardiograms, heart caths, ultrasounds, the people who give us our respiratory therapy and give us our meds, who are fighting hard for their first contract to include things like annual leave and sick leave bank with an employer who won't let them memorialize important policies like leaves of absence and paid time off, things that DSA knows are essential. We support them like we supported nurses at Providence and Tumwater teachers, like we also support nurses at Capital Medical Center right now, also in the midst of difficult bargaining. Housing. Oly DSA has said to the Olympia and Tumwater City Council, give us just cause evictions, keep people in their homes. We're still fighting for it because housing is a human right, and that's why Oly DSA joined the Tenants Union of Washington last week at the Capitol, demanding that Governor Inslee extend the eviction moratorium, which he did yesterday. And it's why we made a statement in support of the Deschutes encampment residents. No sweeps and no sit-lie bans and no banning of long-term emergency parking. That's why we will not lose sight of the long-term goal of public housing in our cities, publicly owned, publicly controlled, permanently affordable. Environment. We are eco-socialists seeking to create a more equitable and sustainable distribution of Earth's finite resources in a way that better serves the needs of the many, whether that's water, food, or fuel. We say yes to Thurston County Public Power to have cleaner, less expensive energy with local control. And we stand in solidarity with local groups that seek to protect our forests, our water, ensure indigenous sovereignty, and work towards the principles of the Green New Deal. Finance. Oly DSA supports our worker-owned cooperatives and is proud that Olympia has the most co-ops per capita of anywhere in the United States. We support a capital gains tax and progressive income tax and made candidates talk about it at a progressive taxation town hall that was a collaboration with the Economic Opportunity Institute. Education. Oly DSA stood in solidarity with the Black Student Union at River Ridge High School when they demanded no cops in their schools, peer mediation, and restorative justice. We also support teachers and staff in other states fighting to provide the best education for their students despite the risks of reopening, furlough, and underfunding. Criminal justice. At the national level, DSA affirms and supports the goals of 8 to abolition, reflected in our platform, which includes defund the police, demilitarize our communities, free people from prisons and jails, and invest in care, not cops. Locally, the Oly DSA Defund Committee works in coalition with other organizations to, among other things, identify parts of the OPD budget that are overfunded, create systems of civilian oversight for the police, and for city council decisions involving the police, social justice, and equity. And to push for legislation that limits the power of the police and helps protect us from militias. The work that we are doing here is truly something to be reckoned with. Healthcare. Oly DSA demands Medicare for all, and through canvassing, education sessions, and through pressuring elected officials and candidates past and present, we show that we won't quit until every person has access to single-payer universal coverage, including reproductive health care, including trans health care, including mental health care. And we, of course, stand in solidarity with healthcare workers, like Providence St. Peter's, Tech Unit, and Capital Medical Center nurses as they fight for just contracts with their employers so that they can continue providing the best care possible while we all fight to fix a broken system. So all of this is possible, not only possible, but necessary. Necessary for the planet, necessary for the survival of our communities, and necessary for our own flourishing. And this is how we get there. We need people to do the work, whether it's a few hours a month or 30 hours a week, or just here and there as you can. It's all important. You can sign a letter or make a sign or help draft a proposal or teach a class or talk to your one neighbor or talk to 50 neighbors, but you must do something, and you must do it as a socialist. So to lead you into your next segment with Kenny Farver, our membership coordinator, I probably unexpectedly am going to give you a poem. So this was written by Kenneth Rexroth almost 68 years ago, and I think you will find that it is no longer true. There are a few of us now. Soon there will be none. We were comrades together. We believed we would see with our own eyes the new world where man was no longer wolf to man, but men and women were all brothers and lovers together. We will not see it. We will not see it, none of us. It is farther off than we thought. In our young days, we believed that as we grew old and fell out of rank, new recruits would take our place, and they surely would grow old in the golden age. They have not come. They will not come. And yet, here you are. Here we are. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And well, yeah, Kenny, I see you're all set. So I mean, talk us through the end of this. The folks know how they can get involved.
Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit big picture as well. And of course, you know, talk about why DSA is an organization that if you want to see the goals of Bernie's campaign actually come to light, organizing with DSA is a great place to actually make this stuff happen. Whether it happens locally at the state level or federally, it has to start somewhere, and it starts with their local DSA chapter. So want to thank everyone for the stimulating discussion from Paul, Mary Ellen, and Josh, and as well for Sarah's great talk about our platform. And so yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit big picture about, you know, us working people and where we go the 99% after the Bernie movement. So as we've seen in the last 40 years of American politics, and what this panel has been discussing, is that change won't happen just by voting or pleading with corporate-owned politicians and billionaires to spare us a penny of their dollar. Change comes when the multiracial working class comes to and stands together to fight for what we all need. We need clean air, not smoke. We need clean water, not lead. We need a planet that our children and grandchildren can comfortably live on. We need less toxins in our communities and more community in our communities. We need better community programs, better schools, better ways of getting around town, better hospitals and community clinics that serve everyone at no charge. As the Bernie campaign said, when people stand together, black and white, gay and straight, immigrants and non-immigrants, there's nothing we can't accomplish together. Also, working people definitely know what we don't need. Some of us might not actually, but that's part of our job in DSA is to go and educate people and talk with people and have conversations where we treat each other as equals and work through these, issues of we don't need a more divisive, racist, and xenophobic president like we have with Trump. And we need to be doing outreach to Trump supporters and talking to them about how, they've been duped by, this billionaire who's not even self-made but likes to call himself one. We don't need rich politicians and billionaires coming up with means-tested programs to line the pocketbooks like better subsidized private insurance and more military government spending and surveillance, while we struggle to afford decent housing, education, and healthcare. Both the Democratic and Republican establishments have served the interests of the rich since their inception, and we need a political organization and movement that truly is by and for working people and wants to extend democracy into every facet of our lives, our workplaces, our schools, and the ways our communities are built and imagined. This is what DSA is about. Shouldn't the workers who actually build homes say what happens with them and who gets to live in them? Shouldn't they not just sit there and waste away? Shouldn't those that give care, such as nurses, caregivers, and teachers, actually have the power to decide how they provide treatment, how much their care is valued in society? It should be a lot. I have a feeling that if it was up to regular working people, our schools, hospitals, and care economy would be receiving a lot more money than our prisons, military, and policing systems that have only exacerbated the problems of poverty and racism that we've seen burgeon under Trump presidency, and has laid dormant throughout the history of America. In the richest country on earth, we can make sure everyone has healthcare, housing, free higher education, and much, much more. Bernie said, and I feel this is a popular perspective in DSA as well, is that when working people stand together, listen to each other's needs, like I said before, Black, brown, and white, gay and straight, religious, non-religious, immigrant or non-immigrant, we can make change happen. The sky is literally the limit when working people stand together and demand change, because we have the power to control the economy and stop it if we need to, through strikes, sit-ins, and marches that force politicians and CEOs to concede to our demands. Because workers, the 99%, make the economy run, not Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, or Donald Trump. That is where DSA comes in. DSA is a political organization that is by and for the multiracial working class. We want to bring the diversity of the American people together, as many people as we can, to fight for change that will better the lives of working people throughout this country. We want to build democracy throughout our communities, our workplaces, and public institutions. And if there's institutions and systems that are currently unjust, work together to dismantle and replace them with just systems designed to care for people rather than destroy lives. In the midst of the coronavirus, these unjust systems are unable to hide any longer from the American public, and people are rising up and demanding the change that we need. We just need to get organized about it. We can't let the problems of our society stall us into fear and despair, but we need to let them motivate us to work together to make solutions, because this is the only earth that we have. Join DSA and work with us to confront the problems we're facing in society, which there's a lot of, and build toward the democratic socialist future where everyone is taken care of. A better world is possible. And on that note, I'm going to post a link to join DSA, and I encourage all of you to get involved.
Thank you, Kenny. And now I do our drawing, but I think that maybe we'll make a little fudge for Adam potentially, but Salvador is the only person who's dropped in the chat that I've seen. So if I've missed you and you've joined just now, let us know in the chat. Otherwise, it's going to be an easy win for Salvador. All right. Well, the dramatic drum roll as Jenny put up. You can also pledge to join. You don't have to actually do it right now. But
Laura Weir, maybe
let us
you
know.
could pledge to join.
Definitely could. You know how to. I have a feeling we know how to get your mailing address. All right. Well, we're right about at the end of the time, so I'm going to do our dramatic drum roll and find out that with the random number generator, it is indeed Salvatore. Woo! But I think Adam and Eleanor, y'all maybe could grab a bumper sticker too. But yeah, we'll get in touch with you, Salvatore, to get you a shirt if you'd like, or one of the other options. And always other ways to get this stuff if folks want it. So thank you, everybody. We've said it a number of times, but thank you to our fantastic panelists, Sarah and Kenny. Well, we'll have to talk that through, Adam, because I'm fairly partial to membership cards. I think that they're pretty nice, but we'll talk that through later.
Forgot I'm on my phone.
Yeah,
I'm just coming on to say you must have a different card than I got.
Nice,
yeah,
nice
yours is different than the one I got.
Well, they've been changing them. Maybe we can check in about that and see if there's
having fun.
better
I'm
one.
teasing.
Yeah. But thank you, everybody, for turning out on a Friday evening, joining us. Thanks to everyone presented. And any last comments, Sarah? Or
Oh, I was just going to thank you for organizing.
sure. So yeah, we'll all get through the next few weeks, and then we'll need to be ready if we need to mobilize on the 4th, and we'll all find out. We'll find out when we find out. So take care, stay safe, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, great to see you all.
Good night.
Yep.